Hello and welcome to Sales Chat, brought to you by SalesPop, online sales magazine, and Pipeliner CRM, Instant Intelligence Visualized. My name is John Golden. I'm the executive editor of SalesPop magazine and the chief strategy marketing officer with Pipeliner CRM. And I'm joined by my colleague in Vienna, Austria, Martha Neumeister. How are you today, Martha? Good?
Hi, thanks, I'm fine.
Good. And today we're delighted to welcome our guest, Julie Hansen, and Julie is in Colorado. So welcome, Julie.
Thank you, John. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so Julie helps salespeople craft and deliver presentations and demonstrations that engage and persuade today's busy decision makers. Julie is the author of Sales Presentations for Dummies and Act Like a Sales Pro, and the founder of Performance Sales and Training, which offers sales presentation workshops, coaching, keynotes, and helps to communicate best practices for greater sales success. And today we're going to talk about sales presentations and how we can really make them as effective as possible. All right, so let's get straight into it. Actually, before we get straight into it, let me just tell everybody the format. If you haven't seen one of these before, it's 30 minutes. We focus on one subject. Today it's sales presentations. The Twitter chat, hashtag sales chat, if you want to contribute to that. Martha's working the Twitter chat. If something interesting comes up, she'll interrupt us. But okay, let's get started. Let's talk high impact sales presentations. So Julie, what are some of the critical components for a winning or high impact sales presentation?
I think there are many, but I'm going to give you a couple that I think are really critical today. And the first one is to make sure that it's tailored to the customer. Mm-hmm. John, we were talking earlier about the habit of that salespeople would go in with an overview presentation and, introductions and agendas and here's our clients. And that is really a relic from the 80s that needs to be be gone, or at least assimilated into your presentation better, because there is an expectation today, as most consumers have, that things are going to be customized for us. If you think about it, you can go into Starbucks and for $5 you can order one of, I think it's 87,000 now, combinations of a drink. And the barista should not bat an eye.
Right.
I would if I was a barista. It's like, oh,
yeah.
But for $5, people expect that level of customization. So if you're going in, trying to sell a solution that has, 4 or 5 digits behind it, you better customize it. And I mean beyond the cursory, well, I put their logo on the first slide. So I think that tailored experience is critical.
Yeah, that's kind of funny because I think we all grew up with that. That was the original idea of customization. Grab their logo, and it's so cool to put their logo on the presentation.
Right, and they're going to be so impressed.
Yeah, they're going to be, wow. Yeah, you managed to get that. And I think you're right. Is in terms of people still maybe following formulas from a long time ago. I mean, once upon a time, yes, there wasn't that much information about your company. There isn't really a way of knowing about your customers and all of that stuff. But now all of that information is available. So you're kind of wasting the person's time to do that, right? So how important is it to start off your presentation right? So not to do what we were talking about earlier, 15 minutes into the presentation, you haven't got to anything of value yet. So how do you make sure that doesn't happen to you?
Well, interestingly, that's my next key component of a winning presentation, and that is to start off. I call it cutting to the chase, and it's just getting right to something interesting, of interest to the customer. Not, we find this very interesting about our company. Something that is relevant, insightful. Certainly ties into the topic that you're going to speak on, and maybe add some value to the conversation. I like to think of it as sort of a preview of what's to come in the presentation. And that's really important for a variety of reasons. Like you said, people are they know a lot about your company. They have access to more information than ever. We're usually coming in, what I see in presentations is people coming in and telling me what's on the homepage of their website, right? And if I have asked you in or invited you in to give a presentation, likely I know most of the basics. I have a pretty good grounding in what you do and why you're there. So do not bore me by regurgitating what I've already read or know. So there was a study done on juries, and what they found was that most jurors made up their mind about the guilt or innocence of the person on trial within those opening statements that the attorney made. And they spent the rest of the trial just really justifying.
Sorry.
Somebody's going off there.
Yeah, sorry, my apologies.
Whoopsie. That's okay. Happens in presentations, and we just go on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a good example.
That's what I always tell people. I use a lot of acting and improv training and skills in my presentations. It's like, mistakes happen, and I like the improv rule: either use it, lose it, or laugh at it.
Right, exactly.
Don't try to just talk over it. It's like stuff happens. So we were talking about jurors and how they make up their minds early in the trial, and they spend the rest of the trial just sort of justifying their initial decision. So they use that information to support their decision. And what that tells us is that there's those opening moments are so critical. That is when your audience is determining how they're going to listen to you, how credible they feel you are, how whether you're going to offer anything of value. And if you're coming in talking about me, and my company, this and that, or talking down to me,
right?
I've already got my filter is already set, and I'm going to be spending the rest of the time kind of going, this guy doesn't know me. He's this isn't the right fit for me. He doesn't know anything about my company. So very critical to start quickly, not waste people's time, and add something of value.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point about, don't waste people's time, because rightly or wrongly, I mean, we perceive ourselves today to be busier than ever, right? Our time is so critical and we don't have time to spare. And whether that's true or whether that's not is beside the point, but that's how we all perceive ourselves today, is like super busy, and business moves so fast and we all move so fast. So as you said, I mean, if I feel in the first few minutes that you're telling me stuff that's irrelevant or whatever, I'm probably getting a little frustrated and thinking, you're not respecting my time here. And as you said, it's an interesting point about the juries, because then you're right. I'm already creating an impression of this is kind of a waste of my time. Right. So how do you? So what? So what are some of the things you can do to create a great first impression, like your opening statement, like like as if your liberty depended on it?
Yeah, right. Well, first of all, I am a big proponent of doing enough discovery to give a credible presentation. So there's different ways to start. You can start with something that reflect back to them something they shared in discovery, and share an insight on that and how you're going to address it. So John, you shared with us in when we met last week that your sales team does not have the ability to see leads in real time and respond quickly, and that's causing pipeline. Well, what we found is that 80% of companies that have that problem, et cetera, and we lead into some insight or something we're going to preview about the presentation. And what I'm going to show you is how you can capture those leads in real time and improve your response rate by 100%.
Right. So in that instance, then you have showed me that you understand, and you've listened to me, and you've done your discovery. You understand the things that are important to me. You have given me an insight into how that might be changed and how it's helped other people, and now you're bringing it back to me. So you're repeating to me what the issue is. You're providing insight, and then you're coming back to it's a more collaborative approach. Would you say?
Absolutely. I think I talk a lot about the conversational presentation, and I think if we keep that mindset, even if we have slides, that's fine, but it's a conversation, and you're going to get a lot more out of it, and your customer is going to get a lot more out of it if you if you maintain that mindset.
Mhm.
So it's very important to collaborate early on and show them this is a different type of presentation. You're not going to stand up there and talk for an hour.
Right. So, okay, so you've gotten your opening down, and you've got them in. Things are good. You've got them engaged initially. So, how do you keep them engaged? Say you've been given an hour to present to a buying committee, right? There's whatever 10 people around the table. How do you keep them engaged?
That is such a big question today because, like you touched on, realistic or not, we all are terribly busy and we have a lot going on. We also have lower attention spans than ever.
Sure.
Just the ability to stay focused is physically challenging for most people. And there's a lot of things that feed that. Social media, we talk in these small bursts, tweets and chat and Instagram. And so we're used to getting in and out of information quickly. And that is the opposite of when we sit down in a presentation. We're at someone's mercy for an hour, and it just doesn't align with how we're used to consuming information. So rather than fight that, we need to embrace that, and we need to.
Right.
What I recommend is breaking your content into chunks. So what they found, and there's been numerous studies that have been done that found over an hour period, a class or a presentation, attention is real high at the beginning, which makes sense. So you want to capitalize on that with your strongest message, give them a reason to stay tuned. And then, after about 5 minutes, it starts to nosedive and it'll kind of bounce along the bottom. Then at the end, we get to in conclusion, and then it starts to pick back up. And there's just some time markers that as humans we're very aware of, and that about 5 minutes is our ability to have a focused attention on something.
Right.
And if you think about it, it seems like not a very long time, but that actually is, it's a sufficient amount of time to make a very solid point.
Right.
Go into a feature, talk about it, give the benefits. So you'd be surprised what you can cover in 5 minutes. So I recommend looking at your content and think about how can I break this up into smaller chunks. And just by sort of changing the topic, so say I have a topic that's like, half an hour. I might break that up into 6 or 7 chunks, subtopics, as it were.
Right.
And I just want to introduce each subtopic, and by a sort of shift in focus, in content, that will renew attention somewhat. But you can also think about those chunks. How do I incorporate some engagement in between those chunks?
Yeah.
And that can be I ask them a question, or maybe I show a video clip, or I whiteboard. So thinking about different varieties of ways to keep people engaged, because that is really critical today.
So what are some of the ways also? So when things start to go a little south, or maybe you perceive that way, or or just what we had earlier, we had an interruption. What do you do when you're giving your presentation, you're doing your best, and you can see they're reaching for their phones, they're looking at their phones under the table, or they're whispering to each other, or some guy seems to be like staring out the window. Oftentimes that really sucks the confidence out of the presenter, right? Because they start to lose it. So what's some of your advice on how to deal with those situations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, I have to say that sometimes those things don't have anything to do with you.
Right.
As presenters, a lot of times we're so sensitive and we start to get anxious, and then that affects the rest of our presentation. So I think you have to weigh that with what's really happening with the rest of the room. And if you're just fixated on one person that's twiddling their thumbs, you don't want to just gear everything towards that person unless that person is the decision maker, of course.
Right.
But there's a couple of rescues you can do. And there are certain things that are just naturally compelling to humans, and those that we will bring our attention to regardless of what we're doing. And that involves movement. And you'll notice when somebody comes in a room, everybody just goes, it's just it's an involuntary reaction. So you can use movement, You can change, your vocal inflection, your tone. You can do something unexpected. So those are some physical things that you can do. Use your room. You can write something down. The simple act of using a whiteboard or a flip chart is really underrated in presentations. We're also high tech now, but as humans, we're watching somebody write for some reason is very, it's very compelling. As long as it's not too long and it's not, it's impossible to read. So there's a lot of tools that you can use.
No, I'm a great believer that the whiteboard or the flip chart, what you just said, because it starts to make people feel like it's again, we go back to a collaborative process. You're not just writing something, you're sort of getting their input, and you're sketching something out, like creating. I had worked with one great guy who used to work for me who was a master at that. Is every time he'd go in, he would work and he would create the solution on the fly on the whiteboard. It wasn't really on the fly, but that's the impression.
Well, that's a good point. It's not on the fly. You don't want to practice. You don't want to just practice on your audience. You want to
exactly
practice that many times at home. Well, one thing I think you mentioned is that getting the audience involved. That is probably the most powerful thing you can do. So if I see someone disengaged, drifting off, I can hand the marker and say, hey, Jane, would you mind drawing your workflow for us? Would you just draw that up on the whiteboard? And then suddenly they're involved, they're up, they're engaged. People like to see their peers engaged. That draws everybody else's attention. You could also do a poll, just some kind of activity. You have to up the activity level. I think of engagement as a pyramid, and sort of at the very basic, yes, you're there, you're in person, you're having a conversation. Okay, that's sort of interesting. Everyone else is doing though. You ask questions. Again, everybody asks questions, not that big a deal. But you start to incorporate some of these other tools, whiteboarding, flip charts, video, props, getting the customer involved, polls. You have a whole different set of tools to keep people engaged or re-engage them throughout. You're going to have a more involved audience.
Yeah, I think another important point is it's one thing if you're presenting to a large audience, but if you're presenting to a smaller audience, like a lot of sales presentations are, they're to a buying committee, to a group of people. It's probably also important, rather than just do introductions at the beginning, or it's to try and find out in advance who those people are and what they care about. Because to your point, right, if I'm the IT guy, and you're talking about kind of the business end of things, like, it's fine. I may be switched off. I may be staring out the window until it comes to something technical, and that's okay. From a presenter point of view, if I've done my homework, then I know who cares about what, right?
Exactly. And that's why I think it is important to use an agenda, even if it's a very casual, 3 bullet points on a flip chart. Here's what I thought we covered today. Is there anything that's not on here that you guys would like to address? You can invite the audience in that way. And that way the technical guy can see, oh, okay, we're going to cover what I'm interested in the third topic. So like you said, it's okay if they're not involved right away.
Right. And then let's talk, because we were talking about this earlier. Once upon a time, most salespeople were used to doing face-to-face presentations. And then technology came along, and a lot of people had to transition into doing online presentations and learning how to do those effectively. So this is kind of a two-parter here. So what are some of the things, how do you help people transition to online presentation? And then, given the fact that we have a generation of people coming through who pretty much only communicate online, how do you help them transition to actually being able to do it face-to-face?
Yeah, this two very good questions, very different skill sets involved. But they have one thing in common, and you have to think about each one has a stage.
Right.
And if you think about it, your stage, like virtually, our stage is this screen we have here, right? That's our stage. So it's all about how you do your stage. When you're live, you have a much bigger stage. You have to have more room to play with. You have to, in both cases, you have to manage your audience's eyes.
Right.
And there's different challenges in a live audience versus a virtual audience. In a virtual audience, we have the challenge of connecting because we've got this technology between us and our prospect. One way that you can bridge that you have an advantage of in a live presentation is you can use a webcam like we are today.
Yeah.
That is the number one thing you can do to improve your virtual presentations, because then the most compelling thing to another human being is not, in fact, your software or your product, but it is another human face.
Mm-hmm.
And you make that real, you make the connection real. It's much easier to sort of dismiss someone if you can't see them.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
So that's a very important thing to do. And I'm not saying you need to have it on all the time like we are, because we're just having conversation. If you're, for instance, showing software or doing a demo, you might have it on in the beginning.
Yeah.
And go back to it, turn it back on when you're taking questions or talking about value, and at the end, so you can use it judiciously. Mm-hmm. But most salespeople are really resistant. They hate to hear that idea. So
what about on the flip side is when you're taking people who are extremely tech savvy, you've grown up with technology, and you suddenly dump them in a room face to face with a bunch of people where now they have to manage that bigger space. What kind of challenges come there?
Right. Well, that becomes more about how you handle yourself, your physical presence, and understanding how to use your body and I think get comfortable with a live audience, because that is a little intimidating for people who have been behind the computer for most of their career. So it's understanding that your stage is wider and you have more variables, and you're more aware of your audience reaction, and how do you take that in and respond to that in the moment without getting flustered and thrown off track. So there's a lot of things, there's all the technical aspects going on in a virtual presentation, but there's a lot going on in a live presentation that you have to adjust to on the fly. And so I liken it very much to improv and acting, because you're always responding. And the best way to be able to respond is to at least be prepared with the things that you can control. Because if you are not prepared in that manner, you're just going to be all over the place. There's always things that come up that you don't plan on. It's like we know what we want to say, but we don't know what the other person's going to say or how they're going to react, and whether we're going to have technical problems or, who knows? Someone isn't going to be in the meeting. Someone is going to be in the meeting you didn't expect. Always something. So you have to roll with the punches, but prepare for the things you can prepare. And what do you have control over? You have control of your content, how you deliver it, your physical, and how you show up, and
how you react.
Right.
Yeah, and how you react to stuff that happens during because I think it's I'm sure we all have 1,000 stories about crazy things that happen during presentations, and they never go precisely the way you'd like them to. But
exactly.
But to that point, how do you gauge? What are some of the ways you could tell people to gauge whether a presentation is going well or not? Because I've in the past I've seen people come out and say, "Oh, I killed it. It was a great presentation. Everybody was," blah, blah, blah. And then later on you get feedback to say, "Yeah, it was terrible."
Yeah, that's shocking for sure. Audiences are different and cultures are different. I think typically if people are very interactive, if they're involved, and you can tell in their body language, they're leaning forward, they're asking the right questions at the right times. That's a very good indication that they're engaged and they're getting it. I think, ultimately the proof is in the pudding. It's hard to tell till you get the deal done. But I've had a lot of audiences that are good actors and act like it's going really well, and then it doesn't work out that way. So it can be a miss on both ends. But ultimately, all you can do is go in, are effective, and do your very best, and try and engage your audience and read your audience, and make sure that you're hitting all the marks on those, on your presentation. Like a lot of times people say, "Oh, it went really well," but in fact, they didn't have any type of closure. There was no conclusion, like their call to action was like, well, I hope you'll consider that, and we'll talk to you. I'll touch base with you in a couple of weeks. It's like,
Yeah,
well,
that was the final question I was going to ask you actually about the closing, because that's something I've observed a lot is, people can do good presentations, they can even get through the dips, bring it back, but then it kind of peters out at the end. They sort of go, well, thank you. Any other
Any
questions? And nobody has any, yeah.
questions?
And then nobody has any questions.
Yeah, I call it,
Everybody's
yeah,
like bored.
yeah.
Everybody wants to go at this stage. So how do you close well?
Yeah, that is a great question, because I call that the whimper close. It just,
Thank you.
okay, well, yeah, I guess we'll call it a day. Or you put up, just whatever you do not put up that slide with the question mark on it.
Oh yeah. Question.
Know what to do, then ask a question.
Yeah.
So a couple of things. I think you need to start strong, you need to close strong. And one thing that I like people to remember is it's a good idea to control that closing. You need to have questions probably before you close.
Mm-hmm.
So what I like to say is, we're going to take a few questions, and then I want to, have something set aside for the end that keeps them engaged. So I might have started the presentation with, so at the end today, I'm going to share with you some results that a company in a very similar situation to yours found from using our solution. And so then I'm going to call back to that in the end. So I'm going to share the results with you in a minute. But before I go on, are there any questions on what we've covered so far? Because I know our time is running out here. Close and have a strong call to action. And a call to action is not, I hope you'll consider us, a call to action is something, clear and specific and hopefully measurable. And it doesn't have to be, so can we sign this deal today? Mm-hmm. It's simply, what is the next step in the sales process? So based on what you've seen today, shall we set up a time for a deeper dive or a demo? What is the natural next step?
Right, exactly.
And people put such pressure on closing, and actually, and sometimes they do the opposite. You've got that whimper close, and you've got this, people come on really strong at the close, which is of course off-putting. Mm-hmm. And you shouldn't have to do that if you've crafted your presentation correctly and hit all the notes. It should be a very natural progression to say, okay, so based on that, let's set a date to do this next step.
Right.
It should be a big sell at that point. It should be a very natural consequence of the conversation.
Absolutely. But I like that idea, what you're saying, because it goes back to what you were saying about the jury. So you have the opening statements, and then you have the closing argument. So you kind of bookend it nicely. So you make sure you don't have that. I like that. I like that word. I like that phrase, whimper close. That's good.
The whimper close. Yes. You'll know it when you see it.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, listen, this half hour has flown by, so I want to ask you one last question, which we like to ask all our guests is, okay, how do you, Julie Hansen, set yourself up for success every day? What's your power tip? So every morning you get up, there's something you do to make sure that you have the most successful day possible.
Well, I use my acting training, and what that taught me was there is a huge connection between my physical and emotional states. Mm-hmm. And I warm up physically, vocally. When I was in sales early on, I used to call up customers, and sometimes it would be my first conversation of the day. I hadn't even spoken to the dog before I picked up the phone. And I've learned since, you don't want to warm up on your customers, right?
Right.
You want to come to the table at your very best.
Mm-hmm.
So I just make sure, get rid of the tension, loosen up, get in good vocal state. And that helps me feel, ready to show up and present and have conversations at my best.
Excellent. No, I like that. That's excellent. Okay. So how can people contact you, Julie?
They can email me at julie@actingforsales. That's acting, FOR, sales. on Twitter, it's Acting for Sales with a 4, just to be confusing, or on LinkedIn. And my website's performancesalesandtraining.com.
All right. Well, thanks again, Julie. This was great. And Martha, how was the Twitter chat today? Good?
It was okay. Sorry, I was on mute. It was great, yes. But we had no questions.
Okay, but lots of discussion, which is good. Okay, well, listen, again, this is John Golden with Martha Neumeister from Sales Pop magazine and Pipeliner CRM, and our guest, Julie Hansen. We'd like to thank you again for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.